분명 그대는 나일세 분명 그대는 나일세 나는 미쳐모.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Today's interview is the fourth in a series about the early history of the Korean Peninsula. I'm Steve Shields, president of the Royal Asiatic Society Korea. With me again today is Dr. Kim Yong-Duk, emeritus professor of Sogang University in Seoul, with more than 3 decades of working and researching in the field of early Korean history. Today, we're going to talk about the early years of the Silla Kingdom, which is in the southeastern area of the Korean Peninsula. Silla's history begins in the 1st century BCE and continued for almost 1,000 years as a kingdom. As many of you may know, the peninsula was at that time in an era called the Three Kingdoms era. Although it's a generalization, we can use that for today's discussion. So as we go back from today, 2,000 years or so in history, we meet 3 families, Pak, Suk, and Kim. And today we're going to talk particularly about the Pak and Suk families, but the Kim family does figure in there. And those were the 3 families that took the role of the leader of the Silla people. So, Dr. Kim, who are these 3 families? Where did they come from? What do we know about them?
That's a good question. I've been working on this story for about 2 years, and I found lots of interesting things.
I looked at the founding legends of the 3 families. Can you tell us?
You know the story.
I know the story, but our viewers may not. So the Pak, legendarily was born from an egg.
Exactly.
That was shaped like a gourd.
Right.
Or the Korean word for that is Pak.
Yeah.
And so the suggestion is that's how that family name came to be.
Right.
The Suk family has a similar legend of an egg.
But in Japan.
But in Japan.
Yeah.
And then they came over to the peninsula.
It's 1st century BC though.
1st century BCE.
Yeah.
The Kim family, the legend is set in the small forest near the old palace fortress in Gyeongju called Kaerim, the chicken forest or whatever. And there, the first founder of the Kim family was found in a box with a rooster, golden box and a rooster. So the chicken and the egg story is quite prolific in those ancient legends. And so where did the Pak family really come from? Where did the Suk family really come from?
That's a good question.
Where did the Kim family really come from? Yeah.
As I told you, I mean, this Korean Chronicle says all these people come from egg, But then there's a legend after all, Right. But then also in the Chinese Chronicle of 3rd century, it's an amazing story, In this article, this Chinese Chronicle said, in the walled fortress in Gyeongju, these people all lived there, and somehow the first 2 families, Pak and Suk, had a sort of good relations. And Suk, when he was born in Japan, but then he came over to Peninsula, and eventually he was so wise enough, or he was a born geomancer. So he could tell that the fortress, the walled city that was occupied by this previous royal family, Park, was a good place, an auspicious place.
Okay.
So they somehow managed to get them out, took over.
Okay.
That's the story. So yeah,
Well, it's interesting about the geomancy
right.
that even today remains a powerful force in some people's
True.
lives.
Yeah.
It's become in the past couple of decades very popular in the United States, for example.
Okay.
And they use the the Chinese name,
Right.
feng shui.
Okay. Yeah.
We would say in Korean pronunciation, pung su.
Right.
But it's the same kind of thing.
Right.
And
Right.
it's basically looking at the spiritual energy flows and different factors. And as we look through Korean history, even up to the Chosun era,
Yeah.
the city of what is now called Seoul was determined by using the geomantic
Right.
principles
Right.
to make an auspicious place for the new capital. And so we see this cropping up all through Korean
That's
history.
right. That's right.
And I think it's sometimes overlooked a little bit, sometimes it's laughed at a little bit.
Okay.
But to ancient people of 2,000 years ago, they seem to know that there was some spiritual forces in the world that they should recognize. And so these, we call them like wizards or something today maybe, would determine the location of a tomb or the positioning of the
Right.
house. I mean, even simple things like
The
that.
thing is, I mean, all those legendary stories in Korean Chronicle are contradicted by Chinese Chronicle of 3rd century.
Yeah.
Most of Korean historians must have read these articles or written things in Chinese Chronicle, which said these people in the walled city community spoke Chinese in 3rd century, and they spoke of their origin, that they are the boat people or refugee escaping from the hard labor building China Wall by Shi Huangdi, 2nd century BC. So that's amazing story. But then there was no archaeological evidence so far.
Right.
But then
Right.
30 years ago or so, they found this tombs with bronze mirror from China, or necklace with jade, or
Agate.
and glass bead,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a rare thing in Korea.
Yeah.
Goods of luxury, you see.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, it just occurred to me, they must have come from China, as written in Chinese Chronicle. So that's the story that
Well,
Yeah.
and when we look at patterns of migration
yes,
of even modern people,
right.
we don't migrate by airplane. We
No.
travel by airplane. And yes, some people do travel to another country by airplane to then set up a new life. But migratory patterns were movements of goods and people,
Right.
their belongings,
Right.
maybe as little as what they could carry on their
Yeah.
backs, maybe something a little more with a cart. So migration of the landmass from the China, Manchuria, Mongolia area down to the peninsula is a very easy thing to conceive of.
That's right.
And we also know
Yeah.
that there were ships plying the Yellow Sea, which
Yeah, right.
between the peninsula and the
Right.
Chinese mainland
Right.
is not really very far. So even an open ocean going vessel wouldn't be required in the
No.
Yellow Sea.
No.
Smaller vessels can and did make those journeys. And likewise from the peninsula to the Japanese islands.
That's right.
Again, a short distance.
Yeah.
Busan is closer to Tsushima
Right.
Island in
Right.
Japan than it is to Jeju-do.
Exactly.
So, the boats, we see small fishing boats out
Right.
there all the time. They could have easily traveled those distances.
Yeah. What surprised me is that most archaeologists of Korea, when they found all this luxury goods in the tomb, they thought this is a sort of procured by trade.
Mm.
But how can men in inland have a trade in China and 2nd century BC.
It's a
I mean,
little.
that's ridiculous.
It seems a little offbeat. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then and I kept thinking about it, and one word in Chinese chronicle also said this some people left over in Lolang area,
And Lolong in modern day
Pyongyang
map
area.
is near
Pyongyang.
Pyongyang.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So what I guess is they must have come to this riverside, Taedong River in Pyongyang
yeah.
first.
Mm.
They lived about a century or so. Then this Han Emperor Mu, won a battle against the Han beyond China Wall.
Right.
And so they also overthrown this Ko-Joseon, old
Old
Joseon
Joseon.
in Liaotung area,
Yeah.
or Liaoshu area, in those area. And one of the 4 commanderies set up was in Pyongyang, called Lolang. But there were so many people who were adamantly against this idea. The Lolang was located somewhere near Beijing, according to old Chinese chronicle. But this new findings, archaeological things that tied together with the story written in Chinese chronicle of 3rd century,
Yeah.
that they have some people left over in Lolang on
So
the way.
Lolong in Korean was pronounced
Nang Nang.
Nangnang.
Yeah,
And that was an important, throughout Korean history,
yeah.
we see that all the time. There's
Exactly.
an important
So there's a
commandery of the Chinese there.
controversy.
Yeah.
This was not
Yeah.
inside the peninsula,
Yeah.
but in some Beijing area.
Yeah.
But it's not so, according to what we find
what
now.
we find now archaeologically.
That's surprise too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Byproduct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many people are not aware that even in North Korea, there's a pretty active archaeological community. I have an acquaintance who is an archaeologist.
Right.
She's French,
Right.
and she's been on digs in the northern part of Korea, in
Oh,
North Korea, several
okay,
times in
okay.
the last 15, 20 years. So it's harder to know about what's happening, and clearly archaeology is not going to be a big priority.
Right.
Even in the South, we have trouble getting funding. Ask any archaeology department at the university.
Yeah.
But so they're actively working on these kinds of things.
Wow.
So as I looked at the list of the kings and queens of Shilla,
Right.
we had from 57 or so BCE to the end of the Shilla kingdom in 930 something,
Okay, 935.
935.
Oh.
I think there were 54 kings on the
Okay.
list.
All right.
But the first 300 years,
Yeah.
it rotates the kingship, and they didn't use the word king. They had another name for chieftain or whatever, but it's the same equivalent as what we would call king. There was the Marip Khan and some other words, but for 300 years, the
Yeah.
Paks and the Suks basically rotated the kingship.
Not exactly.
There were some Paks with one or two mixed in, and then some Suks with a Kim mixed in, or something like that.
I think that's the fabrication.
Could be. Mm.
I mean, that's what I get.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the same thing happens with Pekche people.
Mm.
And I know now that for sure there was a state called Michi before Pekche, and they ruled almost the whole peninsula from around 215 to 346. But then in Korean Chronicle, this Pekche was supposed to be ruling the same area.
Mm.
So definitely, and in that the royalty, there's also shifting from one family to another family. So probably same thing happens in South Park and also. Yeah.
So the Paks, what we know as the Pak family now,
No,
are basically Chinese.
Chinese,
They migrated most likely down through the peninsula
right?
from Chinese territories,
Yeah, by boat probably.
and then
from,
some by boat
Yeah,
across. They settled down in the southern part of
Eventually,
Korea,
yeah.
eventually,
Yeah.
of the peninsula. Then how about the Suks? Are the Suk family really from Japan, or
That's the same story.
same story?
Same people
Same people.
running away from the hard labor,
Okay.
building China Wall.
Mm.
Probably they settled down in the same area in Lolang, in Pyongyang area, riverside of Daedong River,
Mhm.
for over 1 century.
Okay.
In the 108, Lolang commandery was set up.
Okay.
For
108 BCE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So almost 1 century they lived there.
They lived
in
there.
peace.
In peace. Okay.
But then they came over. Probably this commandery people took advantage of this previous Chinese colony, making good use of them.
Yeah.
Probably in the meantime, probably to cajole them or to by of their good willing, and probably they offered. This is my imagination.
Yeah.
Offered some bronze mirrors and those stuff,
Yeah.
Or this is the 1st century BC that bronze was made.
Right.
So try to make this chronological consistency.
Right. Right.
And
You're saying though that these bronze artifacts were found way down south.
in Gyeongju,
In-
Joyangdong,
right in Gyeongju.
archaeological
Yep.
site, also in Suyuri.
Mm.
And Suyuri is also produced bronze mirror of 1st century BC,
Mhm.
and as well as this Joyangdong
Yeah.
site
And these bronze mirrors
of the
were
1st century BC.
manufactured in China.
China, of course.
They're clearly Chinese products,
That's no doubt about
and we
it.
found them in graves
Exactly.
where the archaeologists have
Yeah.
examined the
Yeah.
graves. So they were, whoever was buried in those graves must have been somebody important,
That's
which the artifacts
I
would
don't know
symbolize.
exactly how
maybe.
important
Yeah.
they were.
Well,
but then
yeah.
there must have been some community or some importance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And when they are forced to labor, and they knew all the hardship, and they just took a flight,
Yeah, yeah,
most
Yeah.
likely by boat,
yeah.
and then they came to Pyongyang first. Then eventually Lolang came. Somehow they didn't find it comfortable.
Mm.
They took another flight to the south.
Come further south.
One by the Park family first.
Mm.
They built the wall, was living there comfortably. But the second group of this Sok family came later. Somehow, I don't know how. This Korean Chronicle says Geomans comes in, but anyway, so they were just moved out, and Sok took over. And so this archaeological find at the Joyangdong archaeological site is only 8 kilometers from the walled city, you see. But then the other one, the Park Cemetery archaeological site, and it is Sarali, is about 20 kilometers to the northwest.
Oh,
The other one is southeast.
southeast. Mm.
So, all different area, but then they all produce Chinese bronze mirror of the 1st century
tombs.
BC.
Yeah.
And also, this necklace with the beads, glass beads, is intriguing because generation after generation, over of 13 or so tombs, produce lots of glass beads.
So it's not just one or two places,
No,
but
no.
many places.
No, many
Okay,
tombs
many
produce.
tombs.
So this must have had a special meaning to them, Perhaps you can tell us.
Well, I was curious about glass beads, and so I did some reading of several archaeological
Yes.
journals, scholarly journals, and scholars, both Korean and otherwise, have talked about glass beads as seen as an offering to the spirits or the gods
I see.
in grave offerings.
Okay.
That just some of the beads weren't even intended to be strung into a jewelry piece or a necklace or a breastplate, although some were. But beads have been made by almost every ancient civilization and group of people throughout the world.
Really?
They some would, in the ancient time, Neolithic times, here in Korea, we find beads carved out of animal bones, out of wood, sometimes some stone beads. And glass manufacturing was not indigenous to the peninsula, but was at first it was somehow brought in,
Right.
and it may have been a status symbol, a symbol of wealth. Glass beads certainly would have been intriguing because they weren't carved.
But the question is,
Yeah.
later on, after living in the Gyeongju area for 100 years, they have buried thousands of beads.
Thousands of beads.
Yeah, but small.
Yeah, yeah.
But yet, bead,
yeah.
glass bead.
Yeah.
So they must have produced somehow.
Well,
many.
eventually,
Yeah.
I'm sure they
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
have.
But then what intrigues me is, they appreciate all this jade, agate,
Agate. Yeah.
and whatnot,
Yeah.
And this tradition goes back what one calls Yohagajo, 6,000 years.
Okay.
A kind of revival in Manchuria.
Yeah.
They found all sorts of jade and precious stones.
Yeah.
And people say probably same sort of found in Korea, 6,000 years old.
Yeah.
So this tradition carried on for a long time.
Yeah.
And the same probably people from the same area came over.
Yeah.
So there could be some,
Well, and there was something you once chatted with me about the design of the tombs. That we find too.
Again,
mimic things hundreds of years before up in the north of the Korean territory.
No, this comes from traditional Chinese burial custom.
Yeah.
And sometimes they dig holes underneath the coffin, for example, and then they bury some of the artifacts, So this is a sort of traditional burial custom in China, centuries old. So these people who migrated to Korea brought all the same burial system.
All those
That's what I think.
traditions with them. Yeah. Once we get to 356,
Yes,
the Kims then have become the predominant family.
they took over the
They
whole.
completely took over, and
Oh.
and although we occasionally see a wife of a king as a suk or a pa,
Yeah.
the male line and then the two female kings, the queen's regnant, were all Kims, and the Paks and the Suk family.
No Suk though.
They're not there.
No Suk there, but Pak is there.
Pak is there. Pak
That's an intriguing
stays.
story too.
Yeah.
So that's another suggestion, indication that probably they had some sort of bloody coup d'etat by Shilla people, the Kim's
The
people
Kims. Yeah.
against the Suk.
Yeah.
I have some evidence to tell you later on.
Okay.
Next lecture maybe.
Okay.
But then this Kim, they call their ancestral home is Shin. According to inscription, Chinese tomb of this King Munmu.
Okay.
So people check, and what's written in tomb inscriptions are correct as far as what is concerned in China. And actually the ancestor were the Huns, and when they were defeated by a Han emperor in 104 or so, and when the prince of the Han became a marble, what's called marble, the horse dealer, horse handling people.
Agent or
No, someone who takes care of the horse.
like a steward, a gypsa.
Horse. I mean this.
Yes, the guys who take care of horses.
Well, in Korean it's mabu.
Mabu, yeah.
Men
right.
of a horse.
Men of the horse, yeah.
Anyway, he became a very meritorious in military deeds some later on. He was appointed or ordained as a feudal lord in Shantung area. And his grandson, became a sort of, inherited the same feudal land, domain. And this was in AD 23. There was a coup d'etat against this Wang Mang who ruled the whole empire at that time. But then it's Wang Mang's mother, and this Kim's mother was a sort of sister. So after this Wang Mang was overthrown, this Kims were afraid, and they took a flight somewhere.
So they went.
Nobody
they
knew.
left. Yep.
Until I found the answer. I think that comes next lecture.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we have the Pak family who were from China,
Yeah.
the Suk family who were from China,
Same area.
the Kim family who were
I
from
guess, yeah.
China.
Yeah. Well, from the original beyond wall,
Well,
yeah.
right. When
Okay.
when I say China, we would mean the modern day territory,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah, it wouldn't have necessarily been
Right.
the specific geography at the time. Like any families, there was lots of intermarriage. So we would expect to find some of those family
Right.
names among the women. But let's talk about some of the artifacts. We've got copper mirrors, bronze mirrors, swords,
Yeah.
sickles,
Yeah.
scythes.
That comes later on. When
That it
the
comes
Kims-
later
the
on.
Kims
That's
gathered
with the
around.
Kims.
Yeah, that comes.
And also the wider spread use of Chinese
Right.
comes with the Kims
Right.
when they become
Yeah,
the
that's
dominant
right. Yeah,
family.
okay.
But they'd been here for several hundred years already,
Right.
and
333 years.
333 years.
Exactly.
So
I know the exact,
you know the exact date. Yeah.
Oh.
It's interesting. Let's talk for just a little bit about the chronicle. The Chinese chronicles are much older than anything we have in Korea.
Written in the 3rd century.
Written in the 3rd century.
Yeah.
The oldest Korean chronicle that we have available to us is what?
1145.
1145.
Written by Kim Bushik.
And we call that
Samguk
the
Sagi.
Samguk Sagi.
Actually, the original name was Samguk-sa,
Samguk Sa. Okay.
but
the
somehow eventually
Three Kingdom history.
they added Ki.
Key. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that postdates
Yeah.
by 700 years the Chinese chronicle.
Exactly.
And even the Chinese chronicle at 300 still is hundreds of years after some of the events took place,
Right.
but it's closer to the source.
I think so. Yeah.
And we do the same thing with Bible translations, for example.
Okay.
As archaeologists have discovered older and older and older manuscripts, sometimes the translations have to be revised
Right.
because in most scholars' opinions, the older the manuscript, the more accurate it probably is. So
Probability is there,
you know,
yeah.
so I would think that whatever we read in Samguk Sagi needs to be filtered through an understanding from the Chinese chronicles,
Right.
rather than taking it just at face value.
But then we needed some hardware evidence
There needs to be hard
before
evidence.
you could put the
Yep.
trust on
Yep.
this written
On
ancient
any of them.
articles.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
That's why all the Koreans ignored what's written in Chinese chronicle probably until archaeological finds. I could make connection.
Right.
Otherwise, how can you tell what's what?
Well, exactly.
Oh,
And as the archaeologists dig
right.
further, dig deeper,
Yeah.
dig broader,
Yeah.
almost every day, somewhere in the world in the archaeological sciences,
Right.
some new information is coming out. And it in most places it causes the historians to have to rethink
Right,
and revise and to reinterpret
right.
what they thought was the standard
Yeah.
story.
What surprised me is this Yong-Duk artifact or site was investigated over 30 years ago, but nobody really paid attention what's found in there
Right.
to the Chinese chronicle.
Yeah.
That's where I come in. But then otherwise, I wouldn't know.
Yeah,
How can you tell?
Yeah. Well, the archaeologist has a role,
Right.
and they're to try and interpret the artifacts. The historian has a responsibility
Right. Right.
to look not just at one source, but at many
Right.
sources,
Exactly.
and try and
Yeah.
put the
Yeah.
pieces of the puzzle
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
which is what you've been doing.
Yeah.
And you've brought to us a very new understanding of ancient Korea that I think is made much richer by the archaeological discoveries in the last 30 years, and also by the use of the Chinese chronicles, and in some cases the Japanese chronicles, which you've used for other research, which even then are still older than the Korean chronicles that we have extant. There may have been older Korean chronicles, but those texts have not been discovered. Will they ever be? We don't know.
Oh, we'll see.
Writing materials are not necessarily stable over the millennia. So in the first 300 years of Shilla, Pak and Suk were in charge.
356.
And then
Kims
356, they're out and the Kims are in.
Yeah.
And we don't know about a bloodless coup, a palace coup, a bloody coup.
Well, we'll find
we
out.
haven't discovered that yet, but we will.
Yeah.
And the legends of the beginnings of those clans is certainly very colorful, but just like birth narratives in many cultures, they are legendary and not necessarily the fact. So it's exciting to see the continued work in Gyeongju and other places, Kimhae area, for example, where as fast as the money can help support them, the archaeologists are working very hard. It takes years of painstaking effort to dig, to then preserve the artifacts, interpret the artifacts. Sometimes it's 10 years or more before they even start publishing a report. So
30 years.
the lag is,
Case,
it's taken a long time to get that. But we've seen some wonderful catalogs of the artifacts now in some of the tombs. And I mean, the artifacts in ceramics, in bronze and copper work, the inscriptions or the artistic development of those things is absolutely phenomenal. But it all traces back to a Chinese source, which some may be uncomfortable with, but people groups are not insulated. Paks and Suks and Kims and Shilla did not emerge from a vacuum. They came from somewhere. And the most logical somewhere is to look at the landmass and the migration patterns. And even today in the modern world, we accuse people of the grass is greener on the other side of the hill. And the same thing happened anciently. People were looking for more room to plant and grow farms. So they didn't just sit and be content. As it got crowded, they needed more space. They needed a bigger field. They needed a different place to,
they ran away from
and then there was the other things that the wars and those kinds of things that were always happening, that people with common sense say, we don't need this. We're getting out of here. And so that happens. There's all kinds of reasons for migration. But what I find interesting about the Pak and Suk families is the connection with the Great Wall and the forced labor of millions of men who were involved in working on that construct 2,000 or more years ago.
500,000 soldiers plus hard labor.
Plus the hard laborers. So
it could be a rich million.
Could be several millions. Could be several millions. Well, so we've kind of reviewed now some of the early beginnings of the Shilla era, and the two, particularly focused on the two primary families that were important in the first 300 years of the Shilla kingdom. And in a future lecture, we'll deal with the Kim family and some of the artifacts that have helped us understand who they are and where they have also come from.
I think this is a fascinating story.
Yes.
You know.
Dr. Kim, thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's been a pleasure to spend the
Hope to see you
day with
again.
you, and
Right.
hope to see you soon.
Right.
알까 나는 미처 몰랐네 나는 미처 몰랐네